The widow staggered through the neon-lit job district, her breath shallow, her feet aching, her last credits. Clutched in her trembling hands, towering holograms of alien corporations loomed overhead, flashing job postings in languages she could barely read. She had been here since dawn, moving from one employer to the next, her voice hoarse from begging. But no one would hire a human widow, especially not one with nothing to offer. She pulled her thin coat tighter around herself, the damp air seeping into her bones. Her children were waiting in the overcrowded human sector, a place barely fit for living. The shelters were temporary, the food rations dwindling, and every day that passed without work brought them closer to the edge. She had once lived well, not rich, but comfortable. Her alien husband had provided for them. But after his death, everything had changed. His people had cast her out with no rights, no inheritance, no support, just a cold dismissal and a warning that she was on her own now. She had tried everything, the factories, the markets, even the lowest street jobs. But the aliens would not hire her. They said humans were too emotional, too fragile, too unpredictable. Her hands shook as she approached another employer, a tall insectoid creature, its mandibles clicking impatiently as it reviewed applications. Her heart pounded. She had one last chance. She stepped forward, swallowing her pride, and extended her work credentials. "Please, I can work hard, I can learn fast, I just need a chance," she said, her voice cracking. The insectoid barely looked at her, then flicked her credentials back at her, its multifaceted eyes cold. "Humans are a liability," it buzzed, "unreliable, weak, too prone to error, not worth the risk." Her stomach twisted as she stepped back, gripping the rejected credentials, her vision blurred for a moment from exhaustion and frustration. She wanted to scream, wanted to demand why no one would give her a chance. But she knew the answer before she even asked to them. She was nothing, just another desperate human in a galaxy that had already decided her worth. As she turned away, ready to give up, a rough voice cut through the noise of the market. "If they won't hire you, I will." She froze, then turned slowly. The voice belonged to a man standing just a few feet away, human like her, but different. His stance was solid, his expression unreadable. His jacket was stained with oil, and his hands bore the scars of hard labor. He looked like someone who had fought for everything he had and won. She hesitated, narrowing her eyes. Was this a trick, some cruel joke? But he simply nodded toward the docks behind him, the flickering lights revealing a battered but operational transport hub, stacked with cargo containers and half-repaired ships. It was nothing like the pristine corporate centers of the alien employers, but it was real, it was work. "You don't know me," she said cautiously. "Why would you help?" The man shrugged. "Because I was you once, and someone gave me a chance. Now do you want the job or not?" Her pulse pounded. She had heard too many false promises. But this was different. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering a choice. She glanced back at the alien employer who had so easily dismissed her, then back at the man. Something in his expression told her that this was her last real shot. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Then come with me," he said, and without another word he turned and walked toward the docks. She followed, her heart hammering in her chest, not knowing what waited ahead, but knowing it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. She walked behind him through the crowded streets, past vendors selling alien food, past towering buildings where executives looked down from glass-walled offices, past neon signs, flashing job offers. She would never be considered. For the further they moved from the market, the rougher the streets became. The bright lights faded into flickering street lamps, the roads cracked and warm. This was the human sector where the unwanted survived rather than lived. The man said nothing as they approached the docks. The scent of oil and metal filled the air, the hum of machinery vibrating through the ground. The place was old, battered, but alive. Humans moved through the station, loading crates, welding holes, repairing engines, their hands steady, their faces tired, but determined. Unlike the cold, distant efficiency of alien employers, these people worked with purpose, shouting to each other, laughing despite the exhaustion in their eyes. The man stopped in front of a rusted transport ship, half its panels missing scorch marks along its hull. He crossed his arms, studying her for a moment, then nodded toward a stack of cargo, manifests on a metal crate. "Think you can read those?" he asked. She stepped forward, hesitantly picking up a datapad, her hands shaking slightly as she scanned the documents, shipment records, flight paths, weight calculations. She had never worked in transport, but she had balanced household accounts, stretched credits to feed her children, memorized trade prices to survive. If she could do that, she could do this. I can learn, she said, meeting his gaze. Good, because we don't have time for mistakes. Cargo needs to be sorted, logged, and loaded before departure. We get it wrong, we lose money, we don't get paid. Simple as that, he said, then motioned toward the workers, humans, moving with practiced efficiency, lifting crates, securing shipments, directing small hover drones to adjust positioning. They didn't have the advanced tech the aliens used, but they worked harder, faster, relying on instinct and experience. What's your name? He asked. Lena, she said, gripping the datapad tighter. He nodded. I'm Rourke. Welcome to the team. Don't screw up. And with that, he walked off, leaving her standing there, heart pounding. She looked down at the datapad, the numbers and codes blurring together for a moment before she forced herself to focus. If this was her chance, she wasn't going to waste it. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and got to work. The first few hours were chaos. Lena fumbled with the system, struggled to match cargo to the right ships, nearly sent a crate of medical supplies to a mining colony instead of a hospital ship. But every time she hesitated, she forced herself to push forward. She watched the others, learned how they worked, how they moved. No wasted effort, no second guesses. One of the workers, a woman with grease-streaked arms and a sharp gaze, noticed her struggling and muttered under her breath, for a newbie, you're not the worst I've seen, just keep up. Lena didn't have time to be offended. She nodded and pushed forward slowly but surely. She started to understand the rhythm of the work, the flow of the docks, the unspoken communication between workers. Hours passed, her back ached, her fingers cramped, but she kept going because for the first time in months, she wasn't being turned away, she wasn't being told she was worthless, she was part of something. As the last crate was secured for the day, Rourke walked past, stopping just long enough to glance at the logs before grunting, decent work, don't get comfortable, though we start early. Lena exhaled a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't safe, yet she wasn't secure, but she had made it through the first day, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. The next morning came too soon. The docks were already alive with movement by the time Lena arrived. Engines rolled, workers shouted, crates hovered across loading platforms, and the smell of oil, metal, and sweat filled the air. She barely had time to blink before Rourke tossed a datapad into her hands. Manifest changed overnight. Reroute these deliveries and don't screw it up, he said without slowing down. Lena stared at the list, panic creeping into her chest. The routes she had memorized yesterday were different now. Destinations had shifted, times had changed. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen, trying to make sense of the changes, when a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Move or get out of the way, a worker grumbled, pushing past her with a crate. Lena clenched her jaw. No, she wasn't going to freeze up, not now. She forced herself to focus, to break the problem down the same way she had stretched every credit for her children's meals. She analyzed the routes, calculated the fastest way to get the shipments where they needed to go, then sprinted to the workers, adjusting their orders. This goes to Dock 3, not 5, she called out to a man about to load the wrong crate. He frowned at her, then checked his list. She's right, he muttered before making the switch. She kept moving, double-checking shipments, redirecting drones, rerouting deliveries, and before long something clicked. The chaos around her started to make sense. The rhythm of the docks, the flow of workers. It was like a puzzle, shifting constantly, but as she focused, she could see the patterns. By midday, she was sweating, exhausted, but keeping up. Then came the test. A siren blared through the station, a warning signal. Incoming inspection. Rourke barked, everyone tighten up and look professional, unless you want to lose a week's pay. Lena barely had time to process before an alien official stepped onto the docks, tall, covered in gleaming armor like scales, his black eyes scanning the workers with clear disdain. Behind him, a team of enforcers armed with stun rifles, their presence a reminder that humans weren't trusted here. Inspection, random cargo check, the official said, voice sharp and motionless. Your reputation is questionable. Do not waste my time. Lena swallowed. Half the workers fell into a tense silence as the official and his enforcers moved through the dock checking manifests, scanning crates. She watched them pause by one of the shipments. Her heart stopped. She knew that shipment. She had rerouted it this morning. What if she had made a mistake? You altered this manifest, the official said, turning to her, his gaze unreadable. Lena felt her hands shake, but she forced herself to stand tall. Yes, sir. There was a last-minute change. I corrected the route to avoid a delay. The official stared at her unblinking, then turned his scanner toward the crate for a long moment. No one moved. Then the device beeped. Confirmation, shipment approved. Lena barely kept herself from collapsing in relief. The official turned without another word, finishing his inspection, and then he was gone. The tension broke. Workers exhaled, shoulders relaxed. Rourke walked past her without stopping, but muttered just loud enough for her to hear. Didn't screw it up good. Lena bit back a smile. For the first time since she had lost everything, she felt like she belonged. Lena barely had time to catch her breath before the next crisis hit. A sharp alarm blared through the dock, flashing red lights, signaling an urgent problem. Workers snapped into motion, moving with purpose and urgency. What's happening? She asked, spinning to find Rourke. Engine failure on our main freighter, he said, striding past her, fast but calm. If it doesn't launch on schedule, we lose the contract. And if we lose the contract, we don't eat. You still want this job? Prove it, help the crew, or get out of the way. Lena didn't hesitate. She ran after him, following as he led her through the maze of stacked crates, past welders, sparks flying past, mechanics knee-deep in engine parts. Inside the freighter's maintenance bay, chaos ruled. Humans shouted over one another, tools clattered, the smell of burning circuits filled the air. Status, Rourke demanded. Main thruster overheating, a mechanic yelled back. Coolant leak in the secondary system. If we push it to full burn, it'll fry itself mid-flight. Lena's mind raced. She might not be an engineer, but she had spent years stretching resources, keeping the household running on scraps. There had to be a way to balance the system, to redistribute the strain. Can we reroute the coolant? She asked. If the secondary system is leaking, what about the auxiliary lines? The mechanic shot her a look like he wanted to dismiss her, but then hesitated, considering her words. Not enough pressure, the pipes won't hold. Then we limit the thrust, she countered. We run it at 80% power, stagger the burn intervals, keep the system from overheating long enough to reach a repair station. The mechanic blinked, then swore under his breath that might actually work. Do it, Rourke ordered. The team moved fast, welding, sealing, rerouting the system. Lena jumped in wherever she could, handing tools, clearing paths, listening, learning. When the final connections were made, the mechanic gave Rourke a nod. We're patched, but it's a gamble. Everything we do, it's a gamble, Rourke muttered, then turned to Lena. Get to the manifest, make sure nothing changes. We're lifting off in 10 minutes with or without full power. Lena ran back to the dock, checking and rechecking the cargo lists, making sure every crate, every container was exactly where it needed to be. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. A shipment had been altered, not by her, not by any of the workers, but by someone outside the crew. An extra crate had been added, no logs, no records. Her blood ran cold. Smuggling was common in backwater sectors, but if they got caught with an unregistered shipment, the whole company could be shut down, or worse. If this was something illegal, the authorities wouldn't ask questions, they would execute first, investigate later. She sprinted back to Rourke, showing him the manifest. This wasn't here before, she said, voice tight. This is a setup. Rourke's expression hardened. He didn't waste time questioning her. He turned to the workers. Every crate gets scanned now. Anything that shouldn't be here goes overboard. Anyone caught smuggling walks out the airlock. The workers moved fast, tensions high. Lena helped run the scans, her hands shaking. Then the results flashed on the screen, and her breath caught. Weapons, high-grade, illegal. Someone was trying to use their shipment as cover for an arms deal. Rourke's jaw tightened. We have 2 minutes to launch. Dump it all. Lena hesitated. What if the smugglers were watching? What if they fought back? Now Rourke snapped. With shaking hands, she activated the controls. The cargo bay doors opened. The illegal shipment ejected into space, disappearing into the void just as the engines roared to life, and the ship launched into the black, taking her and the crew toward an uncertain future. The freighter rumbled beneath Lena's feet as it lifted off thrusters, straining under the modified power settings. The metal walls shuddered, but held the crew brace themselves, hands gripping rails, eyes flicking between monitors, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the ship to fail, but it didn't. "We're stable for now," the mechanic called out. "Not great, but stable. If we don't push too hard, we'll make it to the repair station." Lena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, but the relief was short-lived. A sharp ping echoed through the ship's comms, an incoming message from the orbital authorities. "Unidentified vessel, hold position, prepare for cargo inspection. Failure to comply will result in immediate boarding." Lena's stomach twisted, her pulse pounded. She looked at Rourke, his expression unreadable, but his hands clenched into fists, the smuggled weapons. They had dumped the crate just before launch. But what if someone had already tipped off the authorities? What if this was a setup from the start? "They're not here for an inspection," Rourke muttered. "Too fast, too aggressive. They're coming in ready for a fight." "What do we do?" Lena asked, her throat dry. "We don't stop," he said simply. The comms pinged again. "Hold position, final warning." Rourke turned to the pilot. "Full burn now." The pilot hesitated for only a second, then slammed the controls forward. The freighter's engines roared, pushing to maximum burn. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship. Heat levels spiked. Metal groaned. The ship wasn't built for this kind of strain, not with a patched-together coolant system, but there was no choice. "Engines overheating," Lena shouted, her eyes flying over the readouts. "We either burn out or get boarded. Pick one," Rourke shot back. Lena's hands flew across the console, rerouting power, forcing the engines to cycle heat through auxiliary vents, anything to buy them seconds. A burst of light flared on the sensors. The authorities were firing warning shots, streaks of plasma cutting through space, just missing their hull. Lena's breath caught. If one of those hit the wrong part of the ship, it was over. "They're locking weapons," Rourke said. "Get ready for evasive maneuvers." "We're too heavy," the pilot growled. "This ship wasn't built for running." "Then we drop weight," Rourke snapped. "Lena, dump non-essential cargo, anything that won't kill us to lose." Lena moved fast, hands shaking as she activated the emergency jettison. Half of their supplies ejected into the void containers, tumbling away. Some of their profit, some of their future, lost to the stars, but the ship gained speed, breaking away from the incoming authorities. "They won't chase us into the storm," Rourke said grimly. Lena frowned. "What storm?" The pilot's hands flew over the controls, adjusting course, and then she saw it, a swirling mass of radiation and debris, an ion storm looming ahead, flickering with dangerous energy. "You want us to fly into that?" the pilot demanded. "You want to be executed?" Rourke shot back. "Pick one." The ship dove into the storm, static crackling across the hull, sensors flickering. Lena gripped the console as turbulence slammed into them, throwing workers against walls, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. Hold together," Lena whispered, willing the ship to survive. Outside, the storm raged, plasma bursts lighting up space behind them. The pursuing authorities hesitated, unwilling to follow them into the chaos. The comms fell silent. They weren't being chased anymore, but now they had a new problem. The ship was breaking apart. The freighter lurched violently as the storm swallowed them whole. The engines screamed against the ion turbulence. Every bolt, every panel, every wire strained under pressure. Lena clung to the nearest support rail, her knuckles white. As the ship pitched sideways, the gravity stabilizers flickering in and out. "Hull integrity at 64%, a mechanic shouted over the alarms. "If we take another hit, we start losing sections." "We already lost one," Rourke growled, slamming his hand against the console. "Navigation is fried, external sensors are blind, and the comms are full of static. We're flying blind in a storm that can tear us apart. Any bright ideas?" Lena forced herself to think through the panic. She had spent her whole life solving impossible problems, stretching every resource until it broke, and then finding another way. "What about internal sensors?" she asked. "If we can't see outside, maybe we can map the storm from the inside." The mechanic hesitated, then his eyes widened. "We still have proximity readings. If we link them through the main system, we can create a real-time map." "Do it," Rourke barked. Lena and the mechanic worked faster, routing data, overriding safeties, forcing the ship's failing systems to cooperate. The screens flickered. Then the storm appeared, not in full detail, but enough swirling data points showing where the worst turbulence was, where the safest paths might be. Got it, the mechanic breathed. The pilot didn't hesitate, adjusting course, dodging just in time as a plasma burst streaked past them close enough to rattle the hull, but not destroy it. The ship shuddered again, but this time they had control. "It's working," Lena gasped, "but we're still burning too much energy. Won't make it to clear space before we overheat." Rourke's face was set grim and unreadable. "We need to shut something down." The crew went silent. Shutting down the wrong system meant death. Lose life support, they suffocate. Lose stabilizers, they spin out and break apart. Lose engines, they drift until the storm rips them to shreds. Lena's mind raced. Then she saw the answer. "We shut down artificial gravity," she said. "It's pulling too much power. If we kill it, we reduce strain on the engines, and the stabilizers might hold." "You ever floated in zeroed during a storm?" Rourke shot back. "Better than not making it out at all," she countered. Rourke stared at her, then gave a sharp nod. "Do it." Lena took a deep breath and hit the override. Instantly the weight vanished. Her stomach twisted as she floated off the floor. Workers grabbed onto whatever they could. Tools drifted. Cargo crates slammed into walls that the ship held. Power drain dropping. The mechanic confirmed, engines cooling slightly. "Now we ride it out," Rourke muttered. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every second, a fight against chaos. Lena gritted her teeth as the ship twisted around them, barely avoiding the worst of the storm, following the shifting data on their makeshift map. Then suddenly, the turbulence lessened, the crackling static faded, and through the viewport they saw open space. "We made it," the pilot breathed, disbelief in his voice. "Not yet," Rourke said. "Check the engines, check the hold. If we're dead in the water, we're still as good as gone." Lena pulled up the readouts and felt a knot of fear in her chest. "We're leaking fuel," she whispered. "We have maybe an hour before we go dark and drift forever." The moment Lena said the words, the crew snapped into motion. No one panicked, no one froze. They had all been in impossible situations before, but Lena knew the truth. If they didn't find a solution soon, they were as good as dead. "Fuel leak is bad," the mechanic called out. "Containment breach near the secondary thrusters. We can't patch it from inside, and we don't have enough reserves to reach the repair station." "How long before we lose propulsion?" Rourke asked. "An hour, maybe less," the mechanic said grimly. "Then we fix it," Lena said before she could stop herself. Rourke's sharp gaze landed on her. "You volunteering to take a spacewalk in the middle of nowhere with no backup?" "Someone has to," she shot back, "unless you have a better idea." No one did. Moments later, Lena stood in the airlock, sealed inside a patched-up exosuit, the helmet's heads-up display flickering slightly from the damage the storm had done. She forced herself to breathe slowly, her pulse hammering, her fingers curled into fists as Rourke's voice crackled through the comms. "Listen up, you have one job: find the breach, seal it, and get back inside. If anything goes wrong, we pull you back, whether you're ready or not." "Got it." "Got it," she lied. The airlock hissed, and then the outer doors slid open. Space stretched before her, endless and silent. The freighter's hull beneath her, a dark expanse of metal, pitted and scorched from the storm. She forced herself to step forward, magnetic boots locking onto the surface. With each slow movement, her hands shook as she secured the tether to her belt, a thin cable, the only thing keeping her from floating away into the void. "I see the leak," she said, spotting the shimmering trail of fuel escaping into space. The damage was worse than she had hoped. Jagged cracks in the metal, the sealant foam she carried wouldn't be enough to hold it long term. But if she reinforced the edges, if she layered it just right, maybe they could make it to safety. She moved carefully, pulling out the repair kit, applying the foam, watching as it expanded, solidifying over the bridge. Her breath was loud in her helmet, her heartbeat even louder. But she kept going, focusing on the work, blocking out the fear. "Pressure stabilizing," the mechanic called out from inside. "Keep going, it's holding." Lena felt a flicker of hope, but then something moved in the distance, a shadow against the stars. She froze for a second, thinking it was just her imagination. Then the comms crackled with Rourke's voice, sharp and dangerous. "Lena, get back inside now." She turned her head and saw it a ship, sleek, dark, predatory, drifting toward them. No lights, no signals, but definitely watching, definitely hunting. Pirates. Lena's breath caught her hands, shaking. She pushed off the hull, moving as fast as she could, without losing control. But the moment she reached the airlock, the warning alarms blared. Incoming boarding craft, Rourke snapped. They were waiting for us. They let us run into the storm. Now they're here to pick off the pieces. Lena barely made it inside before the ship rocked violently. The pirates had latched onto the freighter like scavengers to a wounded animal. Rourke sealed the airlock behind her, shoving a weapon into her hands. "You wanted to be part of the crew," he said grimly. "Now prove it. We fight or we die." The freighter shuddered as the pirates clamped onto the hull boarding tubes, locking into place with a sickening clang. Lena's breath came fast and shallow, her fingers tightening around the weapon Rourke had shoved into her hands. She had never fired one before, never held one this heavy, but there was no time to hesitate. "Brace for breach," Rourke barked, his voice sharp over the comms. "They'll cut through the cargo bay first. That's where they think we're weakest. We hold them there, or we lose everything." Lena moved on instinct, following the crew through the narrow corridors, sweat dampening her suit, fear coiled in her stomach. But she pushed it down. There was no choice, no escape, only survival. They reached the cargo bay just as the first breach charge detonated. A blinding flash of light, a deafening boom, metal screeched as a jagged hole was torn open. And then they came, armored figures pouring through, their weapons, race moving fast, disciplined, not just raiders but professionals. Rourke didn't hesitate. He fired first, a sharp burst from his rifle, dropping the lead pirate. Chaos erupted. Shots blazed across the bay, crates exploded into shrapnel. Lena ducked behind cover, pressing herself against a shipping container, her hands shaking around the grip of her weapon. "Stay low, aim center mass," Rourke shouted. "Take the shot or they will." Lena swallowed hard, then forced herself to move. She raised the weapon, braced it against her shoulder, found a target, and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her arms, but she saw the impact. The pirate staggered, fell, but didn't stay down. She hadn't hit anything vital. Her stomach twisted, but there was no time to dwell on it. Another pirate swung around, aiming right at her. She dove to the side, just as a blast scorched past her shoulder, the heat stinging her suit, before she slammed into the floor, pain flaring through her ribs. "They're pushing forward," the mechanic shouted. "We can't hold them off forever." Lena's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they still had the ship, the systems, the environment. If they couldn't fight their way out, they had to outthink them. She crawled toward the control panel, dodging stray fire. Her fingers flying over the interface were routing, power adjusting systems she barely understood. Then she saw it, the emergency decompression override. If she triggered it, the bay doors would blow. Everything not bolted down would be sucked into space, including them. "Lena, we need a miracle," Rourke growled as another crew member went down. She clenched her jaw, pressed the command, and shouted over the comms, "Grab onto something now." Without waiting, she hit the final override. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and then the cargo bay doors blasted open. The air howled like a living thing, a massive force ripping through the space. The pirates closest to the breach screamed as they were yanked into the void, disappearing in an instant. Lena's hands locked onto a rail, her grip burning as the wind threatened to pull her out, her vision blurred, spots dancing before her eyes. But she held on, held with everything she had, until finally the emergency lockdown engaged. The bay doors slammed shut, the decompression alarms faded, and the silence that followed was deafening. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping, coughing, her whole body shaking. But they were alive, the pirates were gone, and the freighter was theirs again. Rourke pushed himself up, breathing hard, then looked at her with something almost like approval. "Not bad," he muttered, "not bad at all." Lena lay on the cold metal floor, her chest heaving, her muscles screaming, every part of her shaking from exhaustion. The emergency lights flickered, casting the cargo bay in deep red shadows. The crew was still standing, barely. Rourke pulled himself up, scanning the wreckage of the battle bodies, floated where the gravity hadn't fully reset. Weapons lay scattered across the floor. The air smelled like scorched metal and blood. "We're clear," Rourke said, his voice rough but steady. "The pirates are gone." Lena forced herself to sit up, her hands still trembling. She had done it, they had done it. But the cost was high. Supplies were destroyed. Half the systems were fried. They were still leaking fuel, and their ship was barely holding together. "Now what?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Rourke really looked at her for the first time since she had joined his crew. "Now we get out of here," he said. The mechanic groaned, pushing himself up. "Fuel leak is still bad, but I think I can reroute the reserves enough to give us one last push. If we aim for the nearest station, we might just make it." "No guarantees," Rourke muttered. "Nothing new there." Lena swallowed hard, staring at the control panel across the bay. Every part of her wanted to collapse, to shut down, to let someone else take over. But she knew there was no one else, not really. "We have one shot," she said softly, "if we don't make it." "We make it," Rourke cut in, his voice firm, like it was law. She didn't argue. The crew moved fast, what was left of them. Lena pulled herself to the cockpit, forcing her hands to steady as she helped plot the course calculations, blinked across the damaged screens, angles, distances, fuel ratios. Every number was a warning, flashing red, screaming that this wasn't going to work. But she pushed past it. They had come too far, they had fought too hard. "Engines are primed," the pilot called out, "but this is all we've got. One jump, one burn. If it fails, we drift forever." "Then we don't fail," Rourke said. "Strap in." Lena barely had time to grab the seat before the ship rolled to life. The thrusters ignited with a shuddering blast. Metal groaned as the freighter pushed itself forward, rattling with strain. The stars stretched, the storm faded behind them, and the wounded ship launched toward the nearest station, running on fumes, running on hope. The cockpit was silent, everyone watching the fuel gauge tick down, past the danger line, past the point of no return. Lena held her breath, the final countdown flashing across the screen. Then, with a final sputtering jolt, the engines cut out. The ship went silent, drifting through space. Her heart pounded, her hands clenched into fists as she watched the station grow larger in the viewport. But were they close enough? Come on," she whispered. Then a crackle through the comms. "Unidentified vessel, this is Station Aurora. We see you. Your signals are weak, but you're in range. Initiating docking procedures now." Lena let out a breath that was almost a sob. They had made it, barely, but they had made it. The station's docking clamps locked onto their hull, tugging them and guiding them to safety. The moment the ship settled, a wave of exhaustion slammed into her. She sagged against the console, her body finally giving up, but her heart still racing. Rourke stood, stretching his sore limbs, then glanced at her with something almost like amusement. "Not bad for a desperate widow," he muttered. Lena huffed a laugh, shaking her head. She wasn't desperate anymore. She wasn't alone anymore. She had fought, she had survived, and she had a future. She had a crew.